magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent, and in this video, I'm going to quickly talk you through every faction in the Warhammer 40,000 tabletop game, touching briefly on the overall aesthetic or the vibe of the army, their playstyle on the table, and a bit about what types of players the particular faction tends to appeal to. But before I do, I hope you will consider clicking like, subscribe, and leaving a comment below, as those small gestures help enable me to continue making content. Okay. So if you're watching this, you are probably either considering diving into 40k for the first time or returning after a long hiatus. In either case, I suspect that you already know that Warhammer is an asymmetrical strategy wargame in which players build an army from a particular faction the same way they might build a deck for a game like Magic the Gathering, and then do battle for supremacy in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Because players ultimately win games by controlling objectives on the table and achieving secondary missions, the game is not just about destroying an opponent's army, and this opens up a tremendous amount of tactical depth and complexity such that different factions can play the game in very different ways. And part of the fun of the hobby is collecting a faction or factions that suit your personality, your interests, and your preferred playstyle. Okay, so there are three broad macro categories of factions in 40k, each of which has numerous playable factions within it. The first of these is the Imperium of Mankind, which is an unimaginably vast interstellar dystopian empire that is the focus of most 40k lore and fiction. If you're getting into 40k and you don't know what the Imperium of Man is, you should definitely watch a YouTube video just about that. I can link one in the video description. The second macro category of factions is the Forces of Chaos. These are composed of demons and military forces formerly of the Imperium of Man that have been corrupted by the Chaos Gods. Lastly, there are a number of independent alien races collectively referred to by the Imperium as XENOS or Xenos, which just means stranger in Latin. We'll start with an extremely brief overview of all of these, and then I will go into a little bit more depth about each, addressing how they play on the table and so on. Okay, here we go. Every faction in 40k in under 2 minutes. Imperial factions first. Space Marines, also called Adeptus Mechanicus, are essentially genetically enhanced space knights that come in many different flavors. They're the poster boys for all of 40k. The Imperial Guard, also called the Astra Militarum, is essentially a bunch of 20th century armies in space. It's the majority of the Imperium's fighting force. The Adeptus Sororitas, or Sisters of Battle, are fanatical armored warrior nuns in space. The Adeptus Mechanicus are a civilization of machine-worshipping human cyborgs from Mars. And Imperial Knights, also called the Titan Legions, are enormous chivalric war mechs. Lastly, the Adeptus Custodes are the Emperors of Mankind's personal guard, and they're even more super elite than Space Marines. If you decide you want to play the Forces of Chaos, you can choose between demonically corrupted Space Marines called Chaos Space Marines that come in almost as many different flavors as regular Space Marines. You can play an Eldritch army of space demons, or you can play Chaos Knights, which are those same enormous chivalric war mechs that the Imperium has, but this time they're twisted into grotesque demonic versions of their former selves. Probably the greatest variety of options thematically exist in the XENOS factions, about half of which are stark reminders that when 40k first came out in the 80s, it was a sci-fi version of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which was obviously inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien. As a XENOS player, you can choose between Aeldari, also called Eldar, which are essentially high elves in space, or Drukhari, which are dark elves in space. You could also do Leagues of Vottan, which are space dwarves, or Orks, which are Orks, but spelled with a K and goofy. The Tau Empire are a bunch of mech-suited goody-goodies that can be any race, but are mostly blue eggplant people. Other options include Necrons, which are space skeletons with Egyptian vibes, Tyranids, which are world-devouring bug aliens on loan from the Alien franchise and Highland Starship Troopers, and finally, Genestealer Cults, who are secret cults of Tyranid-worshipping human mutants who also happen to be space Marxists. I am going to run you through each of these as quickly as I can while still actually being helpful. We will start with the Imperium of Mankind. Okay, Space Marines. bands of genetically engineered, heavily armored super soldiers who refer to each other as brother and sometimes carry swords that are also chainsaws. Chain swords, if you will. On the table, Space Marines are durable generalists. They're pretty good at everything. They specialize in nothing. But as a result, they're pretty forgiving for new players, but they also offer a wide selection of units that makes it possible for veteran players to play them with tactical depth and finesse. That said, maybe the best reason to play Space Marines is just that they look damn cool, and they're the main protagonists of most 40k lore and novels. If you're a Marine player, you will never run out of books to read and YouTube videos to watch about your faction. They're also relatively easy to paint. If you take the time to actually follow the steps in any of dozens, probably hundreds of online tutorials, your Marines will end up looking good on the table. Also, chainswords. Did I mention the chainsword? Chainswords might be the most 40k weapon in all of 40k. If you play Space Marines, you get to have some chainswords. Now, unlike most other armies in 40k, Space Marines have a considerable number of well-developed sub-factions called chapters, each of which has a different culture, a different vibe, a different armor color, and to some degree a different play style. Some chapters even have unique models that only they can access, and this makes it possible for Space Marine players to find a great deal more aesthetic depth and variation in their individual sub-faction than players from other armies, which saves Marines from just being kind of vanilla. Here's a brief, believe it or not, it is brief, rundown of the options if you want to do Marines. Ultramarines. These guys are the morally pure, tactically disciplined Boy Scouts of the Space Marine chapters. If Leonardo is your favorite Ninja Turtle, these guys are for you. Blood Angels. Blood Angels are spiritually pure, but they suffer a physical defect called the Red Thirst that causes them to feed on the blood of the slain. They also wear red armor. They have unique units with winged jump packs, and they like to get into close combat. If you painted your nails black in high school and you had big feelings, these guys might be for you. Dark Angels. Dark Angels have broody green armor and broody green souls. They come from a planet that was once a medieval world of knightly orders and shadowy forests, but it's now a single fortress on an asteroid. And they have some unique models that are basically straight up medieval knights. If you have a dark secret, or you're angry, or you have a profound sense of loss of home, these guys are for you. Space Wolves. Space Wolves are space Vikings that are also space werewolves, kinda. They have a lot of unique models, including big dudes with chainswords riding on wolves. They are the wild, unorthodox brand of Space Marines that are crazy. If you currently have a bottle of mead in your house and you lift, these are probably your Marines. No, those four first chapters that I mentioned, those are the four big ones that have the most stories and lore and are most likely to have unique models, but there are a bunch of others that GW has also developed. The Black Templars are fanatical, xenophobic space crusaders with Templar crosses on their black armor and big swords, and they rival Dark Angels for the most knightly space knights. The Death Watch are servants of the Imperial Inquisition. They're made up of Marines from all of the different chapters, and they wear dark armor with a single pauldron painted in the colors of their original chapter. This crew is a cool painting challenge for people who want to have individual micro stories for different models in their army. Death Watch is really good for that. The White Scars are space Mongols. They have white armor. They prefer to fight from the backs of bikes and quads, and their leader is called the Khan. If you're secretly obsessed with the Dothraki in Game of Thrones, the White Scars are definitely the Space Marines for you. The Imperial Fists are fortification experts. Most people who choose them for their distinctive yellow-gold armor. Theoretically, they play a defensive game, but their yellow-gold armor just looks really cool. Salamanders wear green armor that's lighter than the Dark Angel green armor, and they love setting things on fire. They carry a lot of flame weapons. It's their thing. The Raven Guard have a distinctive winged jump pack unit. Theoretically, the Raven Guard are all about stealth. If the Blood Angels are too mainstream for your goth heart, these guys are a solid pick. The Iron Hands are big on tanks, and they're geared towards Marine players who want to run mostly vehicles. Alternatively, you could always create your own chapter and unique paint scheme. That tends to work out a little bit better for experienced painters and players rather than first-timers who might actually benefit from being able to use online painting guides for proven color schemes. But there is nothing to stop you from going rogue, making up your own name, and painting your Marines however you want. Okay, the rest of these should go much faster. The Imperial Guard, also called the Astra Militarum, is composed of tragically optimistic battalions of human infantry supported by tanks and artillery. They are commanded by officers with excellent table manners, but little regard for anyone who didn't go to the right boarding school. Guard rely on tanks and artillery for target elimination, while sending wave after wave of expendable infantry into the midfield to control objectives. They keep constant pressure on the opponent while staunchly controlling their own backfield, and their officers give orders that provide significant buffs to otherwise highly mediocre infantry. Guard might be for you if you want to run a lot of tanks, or if you love Season 4 of Blackadder, or if you just appreciate that there is something hilariously tragic about regular people trying to fight in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Okay, Sisters of Battle. Sisters of Battle are essentially religiously inspired heavy metal warrior nuns. They have some amazing models, including an artillery piece that is a pipe organ, but it's also a missile launcher. Sisters are a savagely aggressive trading army that can trade unit for unit and still have enough models left to claim objectives in the late game. They're also highly mobile, which can help them score secondary objectives. If you play Sisters, you're going to lose most of your army, but you're probably going to do serious damage to your opponent and hopefully just out-trade them. Probably the best reason to play Sisters is that you just can't stop looking at the grimdark rock and roll religious motifs that make the models so cool on the table. Sisters might also appeal if you are the kind of chess player that just wants to trade as quickly as possible into the late game, or if you're just kind of an edgelord that gravitates towards underrepresented factions and bands nobody has heard of. Sisters are probably the least widely collected of the Imperial factions at the moment. They have lots of people who love them. We just don't see them as much, I think, as the others. Okay, so do you ever find yourself wondering what it would be like if Leonardo da Vinci created a civilization of machine-worshipping Martian cyborgs? If so, the Adeptus Mechanicus might be for you. AdMech are primarily a highly mobile shooting army with a number of cheap disposable units that can hold an opponent at bay while the other units in the army maneuver for tactical advantage. But they also have some pretty good, if kind of fragile melee units. In my opinion, the best reason to play AdMech is the steampunk Renaissance glory that characterizes their most recent sculpts, especially their cybernetic horse dog cavalry. I love. But there are other reasons to play AdMech, like being the kind of person who understands XKCD comics when they're about math, or simply gravitating towards the toolbox playstyle whereby every unit has a highly specialized function and they all work together in concert. Imperial Knights. Knights are gigantic, chivalric space titans crewed by imperial aristocrats who have sworn fealty to the golden throne of the Emperor of Mankind. An entire 2,000-point army of these things might not have more than 6 models, so it's no surprise that they need to be durable, hard-hitting, and kind of entirely without finesse. Knights can be great for new players. You can have a whole army ready to go for the table after one long weekend of painting. But on the other hand, if you gravitated towards 40k because you wanted to move around a lot of plastic soldiers, Knights aren't going to scratch that itch, but they are super cool in their own right. The models are fantastic, and with so few of them, you can give every one of them a name and a backstory, which, while not a necessary part of 40k, is the kind of thing that a lot of 40k players kind of find themselves doing. Lastly, from the Imperium, we have Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard. Custodes are the most elite infantry army in the game. They regard Space Marines the way Space Marines regard regular unenhanced humans. They're low model count melee specialists who are slow moving but insanely durable. And they have a lot going for them besides just being super cool looking retro futurist Roman space knights. Low model count means they're less expensive in real world money to collect and quicker to paint than a lot of other armies. Once you learn how to use a couple of tricks to play around their slow movement, they can be very rewarding. Also, if you ever meet Henry Cavill in an elevator, Henry Cavill is also Geralt of Rivia and Superman, you will have something to talk about. He plays Custodes. He's also rumored to be starring in an upcoming 40k television show. The final reason to go down the Custodes rabbit hole is that you really want to find out, once and for all, who keeps the Emperor's fingernails from growing into grotesque, chitinous spirals. Don't tell me you don't remember that dude from the Guinness Book of World Records when we were in elementary school. None of us have gotten over that. Yeah. Okay. Armies of Chaos. I would say that these are the baddies of the 40k universe, except insofar as the 40k universe doesn't really have baddies, simply because no faction as a whole is especially morally virtuous. But if there are bad guys in 40k, it is the twisted servants of the dark gods of the warp, aka the forces of chaos. First off, we have Chaos Demons. Chaos Demons are the inhabitants of the warp, a twisted dimension outside of our own that seems to be shaped by the emotional excesses of conscious beings that inhabit real space. Chaos Demons are eldritch monsters that come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and each is a servant of one of the four Chaos Gods, which I will get to in a moment. Demons are a melee-oriented board control army full of big monsters and disposable infantry, all of which have powerful movement shenanigans. If supernatural monsters are your jam, and you can finish this sentence with me, in his house at Rolah, dead Cthulhu lies a-dreaming, then you might be the perfect demographic for a Chaos Demon army. If you do decide to play Chaos Demons, you will need basic familiarity with each of the four Chaos Gods, or if you frankly play any Chaos faction. Khorne is the god of violence and slaughter. It is from the worshippers of Khorne that we get the most famous quotation from all of 40k, blood for the blood god. Khorne demons look very much like medieval depictions of demons from Dante's Inferno. They have horns and cloven feet and red skin and big swords sometimes. Khorne is all about high melee damage. Nurgle is the god of disease and corruption, but also in a weird way of nature and teeming life. Demons of Nurgle are often putrid and green and covered in festering sores, and some are just straight up zombies, and a few have antlers because nature. Nurgle's big gift is durability. Slaanesh is the god of excess. Think sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Slaanesh demons are fast and lithe and sometimes serpentine, and they sometimes look like corrupted space elves because the Space Elf Empire accidentally birthed Slaanesh by throwing the biggest rager the galaxy has ever seen. The gift of Slaanesh is maneuverability. Slaanesh demons are fast and tricky. Tzeentch is the lord of change and the god of sorcery. Tzeentch demons are just straight up weird. They're twisted horrors that don't look much like anything in particular, except for the greater demon, which is an ambulatory two-headed bird thing. Tzeentch demons and worshippers of Tzeentch often have magical powers that manifest as psychic attacks that can do damage at range. Okay, Chaos Space Marines. 10,000 years before the current 40k setting, so like the 31st millennium, half of the 18 legions of Space Marines that existed at the time fell to chaos, triggering the galactic civil war known as the Horus Heresy, which is the primary origin story for the 40k setting as a whole. 10,000 years later, in the 41st millennium, there are still 9 traitor legions of demonically corrupted Space Knights chanting death to the false emperor as they rampage across the galaxy. Chaos Marines, often called CSM by players, Chaos Space Marines, generally have access to powerful melee infantry, vehicles with effective shooting, and a customizable bag of tricks so that they can be faster or more durable or harder hitting or so on, depending on which of the Chaos Gods they serve. If you were in a metal band in high school, you probably have some kind of aesthetic obligation to collect CSM. Just as with regular Marines, there are a variety of flavors of Chaos Space Marine. Each of the 9 traitor legions has its own identity and playstyle. Some legions serve a particular Chaos God exclusively and have access to unique models, while others might be made up of units each in service to a different god or simply dedicated to Chaos Undivided. The Black Legion are the basic Bs of Chaos Space Marines. They have a super easy paint scheme. They worship Chaos Undivided. This is a great pick for people who want a blank canvas to create their own narrative. Which is not to say that the Black Legion doesn't have a narrative. They were the most instrumental in the Galactic Crusade, but in the tabletop game, they are kind of the most general of the traitor legions. The Emperor's Children. The Emperor's Children love close combat, they love rock and roll, and they love Slaanesh. They were once the preppiest and prettiest legion, but since they started giving up their virtue to hot demonettes on Chrome worlds, They've become the kids your mother warned you about. They wear pink, and they rarely go to war without their signature Noise Marines. The Death Guard are grotesquely diseased, Nurgle-worshipping mutants with a supreme leader that looks like the recently knighted love child of the Grim Reaper and Mothra. These guys might be the most durable faction in the game. They're also slow, and they tend to do best as a shooting army. And next we have the World Eaters. World Eaters are the most fanatically aggressive melee-oriented murder machines in the CSM arsenal. Their supreme leader, Angron, is an enormous red dragon man with a chain axe the size of a Volkswagen bus and a hooked sword that looks like it was designed for an 80s fantasy film. Unsurprisingly, World Eaters worship Khorne and are all about berserker rage. The Thousand Sons are pseudo-Egyptian space sorcerers dedicated to Tzeentch, with more tricks at their disposal than most of the other Traitor Legions. They have access to a number of visually striking, unique units, including their Supreme Commander, who is an obscenely ripped, winged giant named Magnus the Red, who is unsurprisingly red, while the typical Thousand Sons are shimmery blue. If you've seen The Craft more times than you'd care to admit, these guys are for you. The Alpha Legion are masters of infiltration and disguise, and they all claim to be Alfarius, their supreme leader, but obviously they are not all Alfarius. They don't have a bunch of unique units, but they attract players who want to run CSM like special forces, leaning into units that can infiltrate or engage in movement shenanigans. Night Lords specialize in fear tactics. They worship Chaos Undivided. Players who want to prioritize units with abilities that cause trigger morale tests called Battle Shock in 40k might prefer Night Lords for thematic reasons. Or if you just like painted your nails black in high school and you don't want to play those pansy loyalist Raven Guard, Night Lords are for you. The Iron Warriors are fortification experts who are the traitor equivalent of a mashup between the Imperial Fists and the Iron Hands, as the Iron Warriors also specialize in vehicle combat and using powerful chaos-corrupted demon engines. Lastly, the Word Bearers are religious fanatics who carry around passages from the Book of Lorgar, an occult tome written by their supreme leader that can summon demons. This legion was the first to be corrupted by chaos and appeals to players who are particularly interested in an even darker twist on the medieval religious motifs of some of the Imperium's factions. So there you have it. There are a lot of different ways to spice up your Chaos Space Marines and make your collection stand out from those of most other CSM players. Different Chaos Space Marine collections can be wildly different from one another, which is cool. The final Chaos faction is Chaos Knights, which are just the demonically corrupted version of Imperial Knights. Twisted space titans that are very similar to their Imperial cousins in that they are durable and hard-hitting and low model count. The biggest difference is that Chaos Knights tend to be a bit better in melee and not quite as good at shooting as Imperial Knights. They're also, therefore, like more aggressive on the table. They want to get right up in the opponent's face. There are a lot of good reasons to play Chaos Knights, including the simple fact that they are probably the most visually interesting Titanic models in the game. They also offer incredible conversion opportunities. For you newer players, converting is changing a sculpt by adding or replacing parts to get a different look. Like Loyalist Knights, Chaos Knights are also just less expensive for a 2K list in real world dollars because you don't need as many of them, and so they're also quicker to paint because you don't need so many models. So if you like the notion of chivalric space titans, but you're just too cynical to play a Loyalist faction, Chaos Knights are the faction for you. Okay, so that's Chaos wrapped up. We're on to XENOS, the many alien races that inhabit the Milky Way and the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Incidentally, the ones that I'm going to mention are not the only alien races in 40k lore. They're only the ones with enough military power to be major contenders in the 41st millennia in this particular galaxy. As I said before, you'll notice that most of these migrated over from Warhammer Fantasy when 40k was first created in the late 80s. So we begin with Aeldari, or the Eldar, space elves, near and dear to my heart. I have a lot of space elf content on this channel. The majority of the Eldari are the craft worlders, inhabitants of ancient world ships, each the size of a small continent and each with its own culture and traditions. The Aeldari Empire was once the most powerful in the galaxy, but now the Eldar are a dying race, struggling to hang on to what little is left of the beauty of their declining civilization. On the table, Aeldari are the ultimate toolbox army. Overall, they're hit-and-run glass cannons with some of the most powerful shooting and movement shenanigans in the game, but with over 60 units to choose from, they're also just highly customizable. They can run infantry, monsters, vehicles, all really well. If you have big feelings and high standards, or if you have attended more than one poetry reading, or if you have ever unironically popped your collar, Eldar might be for you. Or if you've just always thought that Legolas was cooler than both Gimli and Aragorn. If the Aeldari are the high elves of 40k, the Drukhari are the dark elves of 40k. The Drukhari are unseelie raiders who like poison weapons, body modification, and blood sport. The Drukhari are the same species as the Aeldari, but they consider themselves to be the true kin because they are still living the depraved lifestyle that characterized the height of the Aeldari Empire and also was responsible for the birth of Slaanesh. On the table, Drukhari are fast, highly aggressive, and oriented around trading units. They have serious damage output in both shooting and melee, but they're efficiently pointed so that even though they're not especially durable, in the late game, theoretically, Drukhari win by still having models left when they've traded most of what they have for most of what the opponent had. And so they can, because they're fast, even without a lot of models, they can still score big on primary and secondary objectives in the late game if the enemy doesn't have anything left to threaten what's left of the Dark Elves. If you have an above average number of piercings, or if you play a drow in D&D when nobody is looking, or if you had a crush on a goth kid as a teenager, Drukhari might be the army for you. Leagues of Vottan. Okay, so if we have high elves and we have dark elves, we obviously need moonpunk space dwarves to round out the setting with a Gimli to the Legolas. Leagues of Vottan are a shooting army with powerful vehicles and a highly thematic grudge mechanic that makes the dwarves more lethal as they take damage and develop grudges. There are lots of reasons to play Leagues of Vottan, aside from the possibility that the grudge mechanic speaks to some secret anger in your heart. But I honestly think that the best one is that you just like dwarves. Also because they're like the newest army in 40k after being revived for the first time since the 90s, back when they were called squats. The Vottan sculpts that we have now are recent and likely to stay current for many years. Also, their line is likely to be expanded with additional models in the relatively near future going forward. So if we have elves and we have dwarves, we obviously need orcs. Orcs in 40k are goofy diesel punk space barbarians whose technology works simply because they believe it does, and they're all collectively mildly psychic without knowing it. They can either utilize a plethora of relatively cheap scrap vehicles or like a green tide of moderately tough, goofy, suicidal melee boys that barrel at the enemy with axes as cheerfully as a bunch of drunk rugby players charging the pitch. Orcs rely on quantity over quality in combination with powerful melee units that can absorb significant casualties and still do a ton of damage when they get to the opponent, even if there are not a whole lot of them left. Although they are the ultimate blunt instrument in 40k, they nevertheless reward nuanced play, especially around movement. Reasons to play orcs include: you once ate a paper cup at a party for $1. You can't stop doing the distinctive accent associated with them in all of the video games and videos. And they're also literally the only 40k faction that's funny. Okay, the Tau. There is a long tradition among 40k fans of making fun of the Tau for being the goody two-shoes of the 40k setting. The Tau Empire is a multi-species cooperative devoted to the greater good, kind of like the Federation of Planets in Star Trek, but just as humans are the principal species in Star Trek's Federation, but not the only species, the Tau are the principal species in their own empire, and they are a race of blue eggplant people who wear anime-style mech warrior suits to do battle. On the tabletop, Tau are a dedicated gun line that mostly wants to sit back and shoot the enemy with the help of buff stacking drones. If you own at least one anime mech warrior toy still in its original packaging, or you were obsessed with Mobile Suit Gundam Wing when you were 12, the Tau might really appeal. Their crisis suits are objectively kind of awesome, and also with all of the protectorate species in the Tau Empire, there are some epic conversion opportunities for making models that better showcase the diversity of the Tau Empire, which even includes some humans. Necrons. 60 million years before the current 40k setting, the Necrons were the Necrontyr, a race of intelligent humanoids who accidentally turned themselves into robot space skeletons while trying to unlock the secrets of immortality. Necrons are sci-fi undead with serious Egyptian flourishes and highly durable infantry that get up again when they get knocked down. Necron units are highly customizable with powerful leaders that are essential to their success on the table. Most Necron armies are also anchored with powerful monsters. If Necrons didn't win you over simply by being pseudo-Egyptian undead with a cool backstory, it's also worth considering that they might be the easiest models to paint fast and well in all of 40k. Also, their recursion powers make them forgiving for a new player, that getting up thing. And while the potential for buffs and synergies can be intimidating to a new player, in the hands of a veteran, they become a finesse army. They can be really tricky to play against. The other reason to play Necrons is that you have a job that often makes you feel like a soulless husk of your former self, just going through the motions from day to day, in which case you might really connect with Necrons on a personal level. Tyranids. Tyranids came to the 40k IP in the 90s, when it was moving away from its roots in Warhammer Fantasy, and instead Tyranids owe a serious debt to the Ridley Scott Alien franchise, as well as Heinlein's Starship Troopers. Nids are a hive mind of scuttling, chittering, planet-devouring monstrosities that can either carpet a battlefield with hundreds of hyper-aggressive disposable infantry or barrel into an enemy with enormous monsters. Generally, though, Tyranids win games with board control and battle shock, and by relying on pinning enemy units with wet, scrabbling, chitinous hordes. It can often win with fewer models on the table than the opponent. If you know what a xenomorph is, and have serious opinions about which alien movies are best, or if you have done a Velociraptor impression more than 7 times, Tyranids might be for you. It's also worth mentioning that, like Necrons, Tyranids are easy to paint quickly and well, even for inexperienced painters with bad handwriting and lots of self-doubt. I'm telling you, you can do it. And lastly, Genestealer Cults. These are Tyranid-worshipping human mutants who really want to control the means of production. Many Imperial planets have secret insurgent cults, largely composed of industrial workers and miners for some reason. And when a Tyranid hive fleet is approaching the planet, the cultists spring into action. Most of them are corrupted with Tyranid DNA, and they cause mayhem and disarray. Genestealer cults are also sometimes just called GSC by players. They have a unique play style. They operate like an insurgency. They pop up in unexpected places on the board. They add new units to take the place of the slain. They have some incredibly powerful melee units, and it can often feel to an opponent like they're just everywhere at once. I think Genestealer cults appeal to players who have always kind of had a problem with authority, as well as those who appreciate that genetically corrupted space Marxists with mining lasers are both hilarious and terrifying. All right, kids, that's what I've got, a rundown of every faction in 40k. If you're brand new to the game, you should probably start by downloading the 40k app, which has most of the rules for free and a tool that will help you with list building. You might also consider picking up the Combat Patrol box for your preferred faction, which gives you everything you need to play a simplified version of 40k against anybody else who has a Combat Patrol, and it's a solid way to start growing your collection. It's likely that your local game store has a 40k community. If so, find out how they communicate with one another. You can just ask the people who work there. Discord is popular here in the States. You can probably find people to help you learn the game and give you tips on painting and model building if you don't already know those people. Also, YouTube is a great resource. Speaking of YouTube, if you liked this video, I hope you'll consider clicking like and subscribing and leaving a comment. Although a lot of my content is about playing Aeldari, I have linked in this video description a playlist of my 40k videos that don't require you to be especially interested in Aeldari tactics, and many of which, honestly, I think are my best work. Lastly, if you want opportunities to connect with me directly, you could always become a patron for only $3 a month and join my private Discord and obtain early access to some content. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the people who provide that support. Without them, I would have thrown in the towel on this a long time ago. So that's what I've got. I hope to be back again soon with something new, but I'd like to wrap up with a warm welcome to those who are either returning to the game after many years away or maybe dipping their toes in the wild world of 40k for the first time. I hope that the hobby brings you all of the fun and friendship that it's brought me, as well as giving you something to obsessively think about in the shower. Best wishes. Until next time, take care.